So the three things I want to focus on in this video are as follows. The Osh Bazaar, which is here. And then not to be confused with, I'm sure the city of Osh, which is another large city in Kyrgyzstan, has its own. This is the Osh Bazaar in Bishkek. It's here. The public transit is pretty standard for there. It's pretty consistent for all of these locations, really. The other one is the Panfilov, probably not pronouncing that right, but it's this park here. And then the last thing is the Asia Mall. So one, we've got a relatively modern mall, and then we have sort of the more traditional bazaar here. But they're all fun to go to. And this one here is pretty touristy. I'm pretty sure if you look it up on YouTube, there's a zillion people with videos of it, but it's fun nonetheless. So the Osh Bazaar, it's not actually terribly unique. It's interesting, but there are similar ones in other cities in the region. This one, I was impressed with. There is the city streets run through it essentially, versus like say in Tashkent, where it has a location that it is very restricted to vehicles. I picked a delightfully rainy day to go there, and what I always appreciate is that outside the official bazaar, there's always just sort of this residual people who park their wares next to along the city streets, and then sort of like feed off the market that the bazaar obviously creates. And so as much as that there is official vendors inside, there's always these unofficial people outside who just set up shop anywhere, and of course it's understood and it's tolerated. Whereas where I'm from, if you start selling anything in the street, unless you're a 7-year-old selling lemonade, it's going to be shut down pretty quickly. And here it's just sort of part of the culture, which is kind of fun. And it's fun. It's also interesting to see with how they deal with the rain. Because it was raining pretty consistently all day, and they seem to have a pretty good setup of tarps to keep everything dry. Because as you can see, not all of this stuff is waterproof. And they basically at this market, of course, you understand that there's the typical things you would see like fruits and vegetables and spices, but it's basically anything. There's children's toys, there's clothes, there's footwear. And it can range anything from terribly inexpensive sort of t-shirts or something like that to more high-end shoes and whatnot. I think the people, I found that they were pretty, like the vendors were not pressuring anyone, like especially like with the food and whatnot. I did go to an area where they were just basically selling shoes, and they almost wouldn't let me leave until I bought shoes. And quite frankly, I didn't need shoes. I didn't like anything they were offering, but they felt that there was something right for me, and I had to just eventually say, like, look, guys, I don't need any shoes. I did, however, purchase some nuts and some dried fruit. It was a pretty good price. The guy was pretty friendly. He knew English enough to know like nouns and stuff like that. That's certainly what he was selling. And you can have a look here. The prices are by the kilo, and like I said, it's about 1 cent per song. So I think walnuts were like $6 a kilo, which I'm pretty certain that's a pretty good price.
Dates and raisins, apricot, kaju, walnut. Canada. Very good. That's 100 song. And?
But it's interesting because it's sort of a means of doing things that is more traditional. Where I'm from, typically the farmers market is a bit gimmicky, and yes, there are some aspects of um, producers of goods selling them direct to customers, but a lot of the time it can be just sort of for show, and it's really just retailers in a setting that sort of mimics the way things used to be. And of course, it's often like the one I have in mind in my home city is just seemingly more expensive as well, and it's really this sort of facade of buying local, etc. Whereas here, obviously, it's genuine, and the prices are good, and I would encourage anyone to go and have a look because at the very least, it's super interesting, and it's a good. It's a good way of seeing what things are like there and what I'm sure what they used to be more predominantly in the past.
Такси, такси.
So next, there is the Asia Mall, and I showed you where it was previously. It's a pretty modern mall. One of the things I noticed with some of these places, like in Eastern Europe or former Soviet countries, is the malls tend to be higher and smaller with a smaller footprint. The malls I'm used to, I think maybe it's like a North American thing. They seem to be sort of larger in area and maybe one or two stories. But anyway, this mall here, relatively modern. One thing that I noticed with all malls in this area is they all have metal detectors. And I would have to say that they're all used very little. Like, you go through it, and it might go off, it might not, and then they might say something, they might not. I feel that if you're going to have a metal detector, you're going to want to check people accordingly, then do it, But anyway, that's sort of the culture there. And like with all the malls I went to, it was always a mix of not just like stores to buy things, but then like entertainment, such as like children's areas to play. There's always like video games, there's always rides and stuff like that. And then there's always KFC. There's not a lot of Western fast food in Central Asia. KFC definitely, I think they sort of have a reputation of trying to expand to a number of different countries. And they also have a reputation of sort of bending in the regard of like the culture and what people like to eat there. Whereas I find like, although, McDonald's obviously does change your menu depending on which country they're in, I don't think they do it as much as KFC does. And I ate at KFC, I think twice while I was there. And both times I was kind of questioning like what the ingredients were, because it certainly didn't taste like KFC I was familiar with. And it was, I don't know. It's a good experience. It's pretty inexpensive too. But, feel free to try something else as well. Yeah, and every mall seemed to have like a movie theater as well. And it just seems to sort of be like a template that they had for malls there. And I spoke of how at like the market, how pushy people were, and honestly the mall isn't immune to that. I legitimately wanted to buy some clothes and stuff, and I go into a store and they would just sort of fixate on you. They would stop their conversation amongst themselves, and then they would sort of ask you what you want, how they can help. And sometimes all you want to do is just browse, and maybe you don't find anything. Maybe you just want to leave. But I don't know. I felt that it was almost high pressure in the mall, just like even more so than in the market. So the last thing in this video is this park. I already tried to pronounce it before. I'm not going to try to pronounce it again. But it's seasonal because Kyrgyzstan is sort of similar to Europe or areas of North America where there is winter and they close during that season. They don't actually close the park here. So all of these rides just sort of sit dormant, and I don't mean to poke fun, but it made for sort of an eerie video of just all these vacant rides. And of course I also took photos as well. And this was mid-March, so I assume they opened shortly after, but in the meantime, it just sort of looks odd, and the park is actually quite vacant. There's not a lot of people around. And some of the rides are relatively modern, but then other ones just sort of scream Soviet area ride. And again, this is sort of the thing I saw time and time again. It's sort of these lower end rides that were always being used for children, whether it's in a mall or in a park or something like that. They seem to really gravitate toward. My understanding is that like the Soviet Union did sort of press for taking care of children well and whatnot, and having sort of an upbringing that did involve some entertainment and culture and stuff like that. But it made for an interesting tour of this park. It made for good photos. So lastly, I came across a Lenin statue, and it's right next to the park that the previous images are from. I guess I shouldn't be terribly surprised. It's not super uncommon for them to exist. Stalin statues are fairly uncommon, but I think Lenin has a less tyrannical sort of reputation. In my opinion, they're both controversial, but you can still find them in ex-Soviet countries, and I certainly found this one. I took a picture of it. I don't proclaim that like that I support him or anything like that. It's a piece of history, and it's interesting to see that the statue still exists. Anyway, I have other videos on Bishkek and ones on Tashkent. Hopefully they're informative. Hopefully it helps in some way. Feel free to check them out. And then I would encourage you to visit these places because they're off the beaten trail, but they're interesting. And if you're a traveler, you can add to your portfolio. It's a fun place to visit.